My name is Justin Dora. I help to found Leap Development. And at Leap, we really do target leader, talent, and organizational development. And oftentimes in this video that we just saw, sometimes as leaders, we don't really know what do we do to develop our people? How do we optimize not just their performance, but also cultural health and the health of our teams, the health of our organizations, so that we don't just get great outcomes, but we build great places to work. A little bit of my background is I have a blended background between vocational ministry and business. And when we founded Leap, there really was a passion in my heart to build a company that focused on developing people, developing teams, and developing organizations to build healthy and thriving cultures. And so as we go through today's content, we really want to hone in on how do we start to build some of this self, others, and situational awareness in the way that we lead and guide our organizations.
And again, I'm Kelly Atkinson, and my background is in social work education and also in nonprofit management. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. But I love working with our small business clients because I find that people work everywhere. And so the work that we do, whether we're in the shed industry or accounting or nonprofits, we really have similar challenges and similar ways of addressing those challenges through care for people. So the plan for today is that we are going to talk a little bit about some stories about how trial and error in working with people is not really a great approach. Want to share some data about that. And then take a little bit of time. We are going to ask you to turn to a neighbor and talk, maybe a couple times during the session today. So now is your chance to look around and find the neighbor you feel most comfortable chatting with. And then we're going to talk about moving from trial and error into transformation. What does it look like when we have good tools at our disposal to help grow people in our teams? And then how do we get there? We are looking forward to sharing with you about one of our favorite tools that we use, even with folks in this room and other folks across industries to be able to care for their people well. So what does trial and error look like with people data? We are first wanting to share with you some research around silence.
Before I get to this data point, I want to start with a story that Stanford University, a research project Stanford University conducted several years ago. They were trying to figure out what is it that direct reports want from a supervisor. And I don't know if you've thought about that before, but there was some surprising findings that came to the surface. And the number one trait that a direct report wanted in a supervisor was self-awareness. And what we find in the work that we do is cultivating the habits or the practices of self, others, and situational awareness really does allow leaders to be effective in cultivating those healthy cultures, those healthy teams, and those healthy outcomes. And an absence of self, others, and situational awareness can often dim the lights in the organization, and now you have hidden costs that is costing the business both financially, in turnover, and in underperforming cultures because you don't yet know as a leader what makes our people tick. Interesting data point from a book called Crucial Conversations that stated that 93% of employees polled in the manufacturing field say they are aware of an accident waiting to happen, but they just have not spoken up. And what we found as we dug a little bit deeper into the study is that often there were people that already knew that something was about to go wrong, but there wasn't the cultural awareness, or those social taboos were being stepped on, or some organizational dysfunction was in place. And so they chose to remain silent instead of actually speaking up and saying something. When you dig even further, what you find is sometimes tight deadlines, sometimes it's skill gaps in the workforce. Sometimes it's we always do this right. How about just this once? We kind of do a shortcut. And what I would maybe ask you to consider is, what if you could have tools that might help you identify who might have proclivities to taking a shortcut versus who on your team actually might be more wired to care about and look at the detail, the structure, dotting every I, crossing every T, to make sure safety standards or whatever the process is that you might be guiding a team through is adhered to. And then who are those people on your team that actually would be best built to fully unleash them to do the things that help the business to grow, those sales activities, those innovative ideas that require a little bit of risk taking, a little bit of doing things outside the box, things we've never done before. What if you had tools that helped you identify the people on your team and you cultivated those levels of self, others, and situational awareness so that you can deliberately develop those people, not put square pegs in round holes, but actually optimize the people that are in your day-to-day flow of work and of life?
So, another cost that we see hidden when the lights are dimmed has to do with avoidance. So, Crucial Conversations recently published the third edition of their book in 2023. And those authors talk about a crucial conversation as one where the stakes are high, there's a lot at stake, and emotions run strong. So you'll notice that for every crucial conversation an employee has, rather than avoids, research demonstrates that business saves about $1,500. How? What? What does that even look like? So I wanted to share with you a story from my past. When I was leading a small nonprofit, we provided a safe place for homeless teens to go after school, in between when they were at school during the day and then finding a safe place to go at night. I was there during the day, and we had an after-school program director who oversaw the programming, dinner, volunteers who were there in the evenings. So a couple months into her time there, I started to notice a pattern. So when I would come into work in the mornings, the dishes from dinner the night before would still be piled up in the sink, like crusted lasagna in casserole pans and dishes sitting there in sudsy water. And by the time I got to it, kind of a nice smell going on from like the overnight buildup, right? So we had policies in place about what was to happen in closing procedures at night. We even had volunteers in place to help do that work. But when I came in the mornings and found these nasty dishes, I was stuck with a problem. Because the fact is, I knew that this new program director felt overworked and overwhelmed. And she was actually the second or third afternoon programming director that I had hired. And I knew that I couldn't keep coming up there in the evenings. I worked during the day and needed to fundraise and work with our donors and our community partners. And so, what did I do? I did the dishes. I did the dishes for several weeks because I wanted to avoid that very, very difficult conversation. The stakes were high. Now, I certainly didn't bring home the big bucks as the CEO of a nonprofit serving homeless teens, but I was the one making the most in that business, and I certainly didn't need to be the person doing the dishes every morning. But because I didn't know how to approach that conversation in a way that I felt it wouldn't blow up in my face, I avoided it. I've learned better since then, maybe, I hope. But another example is we have several clients. We have a client right now who's working with a couple of her employees, and they've basically thrown down the gauntlet to say, it's her or me. You know, either she stays or I stay, but if she stays, I go. And she's been working on this, the CEO has, for about 6 months, investing a lot of her time in mediated conversations, bringing us in, even developing workflows where those two employees don't have to work together. So think about the costs that that business is incurring because of avoidance. So it's one of the big costs that we notice, and we also have tools to address it. So when it comes to communications breaking down, there's more data to suggest that hospitals and doctors' offices nationwide might have avoided nearly 2,000 patient deaths and $1.7 billion in malpractice costs if the medical staff and patients had just communicated better. So, one nurse in this survey talked about how she was caring for a patient and the doctor came in and chose not to put on her gloves and mask. And the nurse reminded the doctor about the operating procedures, and the doctor ignored her and continued to put in the central line without the appropriate protective gear. That's one example of how communications break down, whether that's for power differentials, whether there are gender differentials, whether there are past experiences, or even, as Justin was talking about, our own personal wiring that may lend toward avoiding or staying silent, where some people might become aggressive or belligerent. What if we could know more about the people on our teams and could begin to eliminate some of these hidden costs? So, can you relate? This is the time. I gave you advanced warning. So, this is the time where you turn to someone near you and take a minute or two just to think, have you ever experienced a communication breakdown like one of these at work? I'm going to start a timer and we'll bring you back in about 90 seconds.
Yeah, this is for the camera if you don't. Yeah,
So,
microphone.
can you tell me more specifically, and are you not catching my voice?
When you're on the microphone, we're catching your voice.
Okay.
When you're not
Meaning
on
when
the
I'm
microphone,
standing here?
when you can hear it through the speakers,
Okay.
the camera can hear it because it's a direct feed.
Great.
If you walk away,
Great.
the camera's not going to hear it.
Got it.
So I just moved it because I see you like to stand here.
I do.
I just pulled it to the side for you so you
Okay.
can have like a
Perfect.
to the side.
It needs to be in front of my mouth. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes,
Appreciate you.
thank you. All right, excellent. I can tell that some thoughts have come to your mind. So I'm going to ask you to wrap up your conversation in the next few seconds. And I'm also going to ask for one or two volunteers. So now it's time to bring your conversations to a close. And if one or two people could raise your hand and share about the experience that you shared with your neighbor about the communication breakdowns you've experienced at work. Just one or two. Yeah.
So we both are experiencing, on occasion, a hesitancy to want to address low-performing individuals for fear of losing them because, turnover is a major theme for any company, any size.
Yep.
And finding good talent is difficult as well. And sometimes as managers, we find ourselves avoiding giving corrective action for
Right.
fear of losing someone. But at the same time, that avoidance cost could be your higher performers could feel like they're carrying the heavier load.
Right.
So it's trying to strike that balance.
That is a great example, and I'll repeat it for the recording. So, our friend was sharing how, as a manager, it's difficult when you see folks performing at a low level, but you don't know how to address that, knowing that the risks for turnover are so high, and it is very hard to retain good talent. And so you feel kind of stuck, and it affects the high performers on your team as well. So, one more. Who else? One more example? Yeah.
So my operations manager, I just let go. We were doing great for like 2 years, and so it turns out like he was really a perfectionist, while great up to a point.
Yeah.
But when things got a little bit out of control, he got so overwhelmed, he just kind of just shut down.
Right.
Could not find a way to turn that around.
Right. So this friend just shared about an operations manager who was very detail oriented and perfectionist. But then when performance, or basically when the business started to scale, or when the demands got much higher and the pace much faster, that individual really didn't have the same skill sets to manage that type of pace. And so he had to let him go. So those are great examples. Thank you. I can tell that the things that we're sharing really are ringing true for you in your business context. And so, is there any way to do better? We could restructure. There are lots. Yes, others. Yeah. What did I do? I the reason why we start with data from crucial conversations is that we actually believe strongly in that methodology. If you Google crucial conversations, you will find a lot of free resources, actually down to how to prepare for a difficult conversation with someone who's underperforming or someone with whom you disagree. And they have a clear path for how to approach that. So I did approach that with that person. And the goal in crucial conversations, or the goal in just approaching our conflict resolution with data and with an understanding about that person and the situation and our individual needs, is that we can tailor our communications in such a way as to predict good outcomes. So with the person who's very detail oriented, you wouldn't want to come to that person with a very high level list of everything that's going wrong in the business, right? You would want to have some really specific examples of ways that you need that person to attend to or even let go of some of the functions that they were hyper focused on, right? So for me, with that individual, I would love to tell you more about it during the breakout, but some of what we are going to share about with ways to approach people leadership other than trial and error has to do with another tool that we really appreciate called the predictive index. So there are better ways to make people decisions and to lead people that actually does have an impact directly on your bottom line. Justin's going to share a few stories with you about that.
So as Kelly mentioned, the predictive index is a tool that we use. One of our clients is Belfour. They're a property restoration company. We work specifically with their sales department. And when Belfour first approached us, they were curious, how can we improve our hiring effectiveness? And with this particular tool, there's been some research done that adding structured interviews, which is a technical interview, a cultural interview, as well as a behavioral interview, along with a behavioral assessment and a cognitive assessment, can actually improve hiring effectiveness by about 58%. So with that in mind, we approached the project, and what we started with is, what would the ideal salesperson look like? And we built a model, we built a target to start to measure candidates against. And over about a 2-year period, we had 250 candidates come through that system. We hired 31 of them, or Belfour hired 31 of those candidates. And at the end of that 2-year mark, they had still retained about 23 of that 31, which is about a 74% retention, which compared to the industry, if you look at the construction industry, it's about a 57% retention rate. Manufacturing is about 61%. That was an improvement. But we actually did a little bit of a deeper dive, and what we found is, of the 8 people that no longer remained, 4 of them had moved on for better opportunities, and only 4 were a bad fit. So really effective approach to helping to improve their hiring effectiveness. Another client we worked with, Visiting Angels, it's a franchise. They do in-home non-medical healthcare for aging adults. And what we did is we worked with a particular franchisee who had dozens of units, and we took one of the portfolios. We identified the bottom performers, those that were having the biggest performance issues, and of the ones we were actually able to work with and give interventions, we saw 100% improvement on the KPIs that drive revenue in the business. So is everything at the low end, it was 11% improvement over about a 4-month period that we worked with the executives, and then on the high end, 38%. And one particular operator based in Lincoln, Nebraska, had a proclivity for being very accommodating as a leader, constantly letting herself be interrupted by her team, constantly solving their problems versus helping them solve their own problems. And what we found in doing kind of a leader deep dive with her, as well as a team workshop with the whole team, is she wouldn't even begin to accomplish her work until everyone left at 5 o'clock. And so trying to drive the growth of the business was near impossible because you don't start making sales calls at 5:30, right? People are ready to be done for the day. So what we did is we gave her a way to both communicate and the team a way to understand what the different needs were. How can we make sure that she has closed door hours so she can get her work done? How do we help the team solve some of their own problems so they're not necessarily just coming to her for all the issues? And she actually broke her own quarterly records over the course of that 4 months because she was able to increase the productivity and the efficiency of how their team operated. The last one is a nonprofit called Impact Campus Ministries. And this particular group came to us, and they were looking at their leadership at different campuses across the country. And they were finding that people were not able to hit the growth goals they were setting. And so what we helped them do, again, is we built a model, we built a target for how to look at, do you have a good fit with the current people that you have? And we found that none of the existing leaders in place were actually aligned to the type of behaviors that were needed for growth. Now, lest you think we recommended they terminate everyone, we did not. What we did say is they should consider a more strategic approach to hiring, especially as they're looking for new campuses that they want to open a ministry hub at. And then how can they help support those existing leaders, either with the right support team that can take on some of those growth activities, or begin to transition them into more effective roles for their long term.
So, why does people data matter? What difference does it make? First of all, we find that data is objective. It is not a subjective experience to say, I gain energy by being in front of people. Whereas another colleague would say, I gain energy by being able to focus deeply on work for a long time without being interrupted. That is an example of a workplace behavior that we discern through the tools that we use. It's objective, and it becomes a shared language when the entire team begins to incorporate this data into your functioning. Then it becomes shared. We all recognize and can understand the 4 different drives that Justin is going to talk about, and we can think through the intensity that each one of us bring to the table so that when we're approaching work, we're able to tailor it in a way that is shared well among the strengths on the team. And then lastly, it's individualized. I don't know how many of you are working with younger people who are gaining experience in their roles, but they really expect to be developed as leaders and to be treated as an individual, to be known for the unique contributions that they can bring in your business. And if they're not able to find that in the spaces that we create, they're going to want to look elsewhere to find where they can be developed as a leader. And so our data allows you to do that as you're developing a diverse workforce. So it turns out that if you learn to measure people's drives, then you can begin to predict the needs that they have as well as the behaviors that they bring to work. So in the 1920s, some research was done to identify 4 basic drives that guide people at work. And Justin is going to share a little bit more about that.
For the sake of time, I'm not going to go super deep here, but I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of what these drives are, how we define them, and then an opportunity, if you're interested, to actually take a free assessment. We'll have a QR code up here, and if you're interested, you'll just click that QR code It'll take you to the link. You can do the assessment, and then our team will follow up with you next week to give you the results and schedule what we call a readback for you to get an understanding of what it means. And then if you have further interest of how this might impact your team, we'd love to talk about that. But you'll see on the screen 4 drives. The first one is called dominance, and it's defined as the drive to exert one's influence on people or events. This scale is between high and low, so people who are high like the big picture, like to move quickly, like to have an influence, versus people on the lower side like to work on a team. They like to collaborate, and they don't want to be left on an island. That B drive, that extroversion drive, is defined as the drive for social interaction with other people. So high B people like to talk, they like to persuade. Low B people like to think through things, like to analyze systems and facts. That C drive is all about pace. We call it patience. So people who are high in patience are more methodical or process-oriented, versus people who are on the lower side work from a strong sense of urgency, like to work quickly, like to move on quickly, and like variety and change. And then that last drive is called formality, and it's defined as the drive to conform to rules and structure. So if you remember at the beginning, we were talking about people who wanted to cut corners, who maybe didn't want to follow all the rules and the details. Oftentimes that can correlate to a lower drive for formality. And so helping our clients understand who might be a good fit is what I was driving at that point. Last thing I'll say real quick here, in a perfect world, we get to do the things that most naturally connect for us. And we all know that we don't live in a perfect world. And so learning to build these levels of awareness, self, others, and situational awareness, allow us to self-regulate and recognize what are the different contexts or conversations or moments or milestones of a project that I need to adapt. I might need to lower my extroversion because I'm doing all the talking and my team's not, and we're getting the silence kills effect. I might need to be a little bit more detailed and a little bit more structured because things are slipping through the cracks, and I need to find someone that can fill that hole. What we're trying to avoid is wrong place, wrong time, wrong behavior, and we get square pegs and round holes, people burning out and people moving on from our organizations and getting the impact of turnover, which we've dialogued about a little bit. Now, we won't have time for these questions, but I do want you to take a minute to think about this as you exit this first session. Can you identify a challenge that you're facing with people development? What do you think the impact of that challenge is right now? And what are some next steps, even as you're here over the next few days? What are some next steps as you get back to wherever you're from, you re-engage with your team, that you can re-engage in how to address some of these people challenges? Like I mentioned, here's a QR code. Feel free to snag that. You'll get all of the relevant data. It's just an email, and then it will take you to the assessment. We will be notified. We'll probably follow up with you guys next week in terms of scheduling a time to walk through your data and give you those reports, as well as answer any other questions you might have. I think we're right at time. Is that right? I will say this, Kelly and I will be up here. I know we have 20 minutes before the next session. If you do have questions, please feel free. We do have cards up here. We'd love to give you our information. And anything you want to say to close us up? No.
I just want to say thank you. Y'all did an excellent
Thank
job.
you.